Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to dive into looking at lower body assessments. I know I've done videos on actually assessing the lower body, so if you want to see my real thoughts on the assessments that I like to do, are really more so assessing movement. We can go watch those videos, but today we're going to get into some common ones that I kind of have a grievance with. Not really in a bad way, but things that I think aren't necessarily useful for the average coach to be using because it's not going to help us assess really what's going on or what we're trying to get out of the exercise itself. So what can we be doing instead? And also just generally by me breaking down why I don't like these exercises as an assessment, we'll also by proxy know what to be looking at when we are assessing these movements themselves. So getting into lower body assessments, we could look at even things that are passive, like table tests, etc. But if we're gonna go look through the classic, I don't know, NASM, ISSA, whatever, the main certifications that most of us have coaches, or if you've paid for a coach or you're just a fitness consumer, coaches in the industry typically have to pay for these courses in order to actually be certified as a trainer. They'll give us kind of these assessments as things that we should be doing with our clients in day one. Now, one of the first ones that you'll see commonly is a Dowel RDL. Now, this one is actually one that I have like the least amount of a gripe with. I think it can actually be decent for assessing someone's ability to hinge, but what I don't really like about it is, well, when we're assessing a hinge, what are we looking for? We're looking for our ability to move our pelvis backwards in space, right? If I was gonna go ahead and delineate right now between a squat and a hinge would be me being able to move my pelvis front to back, right? Squat, more up to down. Now, Nick, what about a back squat? I'm a little bit hingy, is that okay? No, I'm talking about a hinge at its purest form and a squat at its purest form. There will be lots of gradations of things in the middle, right? But generally speaking, we wanna make sure we have the ability to do both of those things when we want to in the right circumstances, in the right environment, etc. So a Dowel RDL, I don't really hate that, but what I don't love is the hyperfixation on what our spine's doing. Oftentimes, if we're moving a lot through the spine, it's probably gonna be more of a representation of where we're carrying our center of mass. So if my weight's back in my heels, or where my pelvis is in space. So am I in a lot of anterior tilt? Am I in too much posterior tilt? Whatever it is. I think first and foremost for a hinge, I just wanna make sure that my pelvis is in a neutral position and I can get to mid-foot pressure and maintain that as I move my hips back in space. Very commonly, you hear me talk about this all the time. You'll see hips and knees both move back together. I'm not trying to hinge through my knees, I'm trying to hinge through my pelvis. So what's wrong with the Dowel? It's putting too much of a focus on the spine, which as long as we're somewhere in the ballpark of neutral, we're probably good. And also really the main reason I don't love it is the fact that we can't load it at all. I actually wanna give somebody a little bit of weight just so it can help them control their center of mass better. So especially if I'm holding dumbbells, kettlebells in my hand, I can direct those straight down to my midfoot. So I can actually direct where my weight's going with the direction of the weights that I'm holding. So I can actually facilitate keeping my weight in that spot as I push my hips back in space. So they can almost act as a counterbalance, if you will, which we'll get into the same idea when we get into squatting stuff. But I think we have this this misunderstanding that we need to do these complex assessments before we get in the door. From a liability standpoint as a coach, we've already done so much. We've looked at a client's medical history already. They've given us an idea of, basic park use stuff, what might be wrong with them from a medical standpoint, injury standpoint, etc. Give them a questionnaire. Hey, what exercises do you not like? What do you like? What hurts on you? What has hurt on you before, right? So we have an idea of, okay, like, this person is probably more than capable of holding 20 pounds in each hand and doing an RDL or doing a lunge, right? We have an idea of that before they walk in the door, and also have an idea of who should not be doing that before we walk in the door, right? So looking at that, it is perfectly safe for most people for us to do a basic squat pattern, a lunge pattern, hinge pattern on day one. And that does not mean go do a barbell deadlift, a low bar back squat, and a fucking hang snatch. I don't know. Like, we don't need to do super loadable, complex exercises, but we can do some exercise on day one. For most people, that's probably fine. Getting into another thing with a Dowel is when we somehow put the Dowel back into our hands and then put it overhead and squat. I don't really know why the overhead squat is so popular. Really, it's making squatting just very hard. It's putting a lot of elements into a squat pattern that makes it harder for us to squat. So one, it's very high skill. It's hard to execute. So most people are probably going to fail the test because it's so hard to execute, right? In an overhead squat, I don't want my shoulder mobility or my thoracic mobility to be affecting my ability to actually squat. If my goal is to actually do an overhead squat for some reason at some day, then maybe I do want to incorporate that in a program. But for the average person, if I want to learn to squat, I want to make squatting as easy as possible. So again, looking at tenets like foot pressure, looking at where the pelvis is in space, how can I get it to move more vertically? I probably want to choose a lower skill squat assessment. So maybe it's a counterbalance squat, maybe it's a goblet squat. If I need to elevate the heels, that's not cheating, right? It's just making it a little bit easier for me to manage my center of mass. So maybe I have ankle issues or I have a hard time controlling my center of mass. Elevating the heels will just make it a little bit easier for me to move through relative dorsiflexion. So I'm starting in a little bit more plantar flexion. It's also going to put me more into my midfoot, help me facilitating that more vertical squat pattern, right? Same with the anterior load. If I'm going to goblet load, going to counterbalance, weights out in front of me, easier for me to stay more upright. Now the issue, or really what we're getting to assessing outside of basic joint positions, okay, is pelvis moving up and down, can I maintain neutral pelvis? Are my knees going out, knees going in, are they tracking over my toes, what's going on there? Head position, etc. Outside of those parameters, we can still add in the constraint of a heel wedge, for example, or anterior load, and still have somebody who tries to hinge their squat, right? So that might tell us a lot about how they move through space. Same thing for an RDL. Maybe we'll put in some constraints to help us hinge better, and we're still doing a very squatty RDL, right? Or we're not fixing things we need to fix. So that really is an assessment on its own. Is okay, with constraints, are we still executing it well or poorly? And then obviously we can do our job as coaches and coach them through it better. But anecdote to a bad idea is a better idea. Overhead squat, let's just do a goblet squat, right? Elevate the heels if we need to. We can still assess a lot of things at the ankle, knee, hip, spine, pelvis, etc. Whatever we're gonna be looking at there, we can still assess all those things without doing an overhead squat. Almost like if that was 2A, 2B is like the wall squat test where you squat with your knees against a wall. I haven't seen that one too much, but I know that was the thing. I think this all originated from a study that was talking about like shear forces to the knee versus to the spine. And really all you hear about is when you do less knees over toes, you get less shear force to the knee. It's like, yeah, no shit, because you're hinging more, right? We're offloading the force from the knee to the hips. And in the same study, what they'll show you is you also have more shear force through the spine when you do that, right? So we're just moving force from the knee to the spine. When I'm squatting, I probably want my knees to go more over my toes. If I want less knee travel, I'm probably gonna assess a hinge, right? So probably not gonna be looking at a wall squat or pretty much mirrored into it in terms of it actually being a good assessment. Outside of that, like a pistol squat, single leg squat, that gets thrown around a little bit. I would rather just do like a stationary lunge. I think most people are gonna do actually a very poor job of executing a stationary lunge. We can still assess a lot of the same things. Can I maintain almost equal weight distribution between front leg and back leg? On the front leg, can I get hip internal rotation in that front hip? Can I keep good foot pressure? Can I get back hip extension, or am I kind of folding over, right? People very often will fold over instead of getting hip extension. So looking at how we're executing those things can tell us a lot about front hip, about back hip, things that we're gonna deem as like, basic functional necessities at those joints. Then lastly, we could assess posture. That's getting pretty big, where we see like the side-by-side posture photos. I'm not putting a lot of weight into that. I think posture can be a really good heuristic for suggesting how somebody may organize themselves when they get moving, but I care less about how we are statically and more about how we are when we move. So if we can get out of our posture, probably not too concerned about it, although we could use that again as a guiding principle for, okay, if I'm stuck with a more kyphotic posture or a more like posteriorly compressed posture, that might indicate where I may lack of movement when we actually get moving. But if I can actually move out of that, I'm gonna care less about that. So let's put less weight into posture and more weight into our ability to move in and out of posture, exert qualities like strength, stability, etc. So with that, we'll put a bow on it. Again, that kind of gives you an idea that I like to assess movement as opposed to using specific movement variations. But if we can kind of know what to look for on a hinge, on a squat, on a lunge, we can get a lot done in terms of assessing the lower body. If you guys need help with assessing yourself or your clients and want to learn more, please press the link below. And again, thank you for being here. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon.